She's stitching up a Mafia boss, and he's staring at her lips. Damon is sitting on the edge of the marble tub, a deep knife wound in his side. The maid is sewing his flesh, her hands perfectly steady. Suddenly, his hand wraps around her wrist. He pulls her close, his thumb tracing her jawline, his breath on her mouth. He whispers how dangerous it is to get close to him.
Let us start by looking at a perfectly designed trap. Picture a maid whose only objective is to survive the day, somehow tangled in the orbit of Damon Volkov, the absolute apex predator of the Chicago underworld. The story hooks us on one chaotic night. The untouchable kingpin stumbles to her door, drenched in fresh blood, stripped of his armor, and begging for her specifically. Any rational survival instinct demands that you run from a wounded monster. Instead, she pulls him inside and turns the lock, sealing her own fate. You and I are going to unpack this together. But let us start with a simple truth. Never play the savior to a walking catastrophe, because their wreckage will inevitably become your own. The profound tragedy of that night is that her choice was not a sudden accident. She opened that door already knowing she was permanently bound to his world. To understand how she fell into this cycle, we have to rewind to where the psychological tether was first tied, starting with a bitter cup of coffee. The sun barely breaches the horizon before her alarm shatters the silence. She lies there, gathering the armor needed to survive another brutal day inside a Mafia fortress. We all build these fragile mental walls. Yet the lesson here is unavoidable. Sometimes, closing your eyes to a looming threat only ensures it strikes with absolute devastation when it finally arrives. You simply cannot outrun your own narrative. Staying perfectly still in the dark was her quiet rebellion, her only sliver of real autonomy. The clock strikes 5:30, and the illusion shatters. Outside, this iron compound operates like a war zone, patrolled by armed enforcers, moving like restless ghosts. Stripped of her identity, she shifts into survival autopilot. She buttons her rigid uniform and twists her hair into a severe knot, hiding her individuality. She slips into the hidden corridors, walking the same shadow-soaked route she has endured for 2 years. There is a deeply human lesson embedded in this repetition. When you are drowning in a toxic environment, clinging to tiny daily rituals is often the only anchor keeping your mind from breaking. The kitchen serves as the sole sanctuary in this architectural nightmare. In these early hours, it is the only space where the invisible workforce can exhale without the suffocating gaze of a predator. It is human nature to carve out sanctuaries in the heart of danger. Her grounding force is Sloane, the head cook, who is already covered in flour and wrestling with the morning brew. Sloane operates as the fierce matriarch of the lower ranks, but more importantly, she provides the one thing this bleak estate actively crushes: laughter. She tosses a sharply sarcastic greeting over her shoulder. The underlying wisdom here is profound yet simple. A loyal friend who anchors you to reality is absolutely invaluable, especially when the surrounding world is built entirely on violence and brutal fear. Alina fires back a quick defense, insisting she is far from royalty. Sloane immediately dismantles her, playfully mocking her perfectly ironed uniform and her rigid discipline. There is a deep relief in having someone witness your extreme survival habits and treat them as mere personality quirks. A rare smile breaks across Alina's face as she arranges the silver tray. Notice how she aligns every saucer with obsessive precision. She quietly asks if the kingpin is awake, and Sloane reveals he has been locked in his study since 5. The heavy scent of dark roast hangs in the air like a bitter omen. The lesson woven into this moment is vital. We often use the pursuit of absolute perfection as a rigid shield, hoping it will hide our overwhelming inner panic from the rest of the dangerous world. That sharp aroma acts as her daily psychological trigger. Damon takes his coffee exactly how he rules his empire, unsoftened, devoid of sweetness, and violently strong. We constantly map our existence around the toxic figures who govern us. Sloane casually complains that their violent employer wakes up enraged. Panic spikes in Alina's chest as she begs her friend to whisper, but Sloane just shrugs. Gathering her courage, Alina lifts the heavy silver burden and steps into the cavernous main hall. Silent enforcers stand rooted in the shadows like gargoyles. Let us pause for a blunt piece of wisdom. When walking through a house filled with ruthless killers, swallowing your boldest opinions is the absolute greatest survival tactic you can ever possess. As she glides past, not a single armed guard registers her presence. This is the core doctrine of surviving a criminal empire built on pure violence. You evaporate into the background, or you become collateral damage. She has spent 2 years weaponizing her invisibility, ensuring the predators never catch her scent. The master's estate feels like a gilded cage buried in the isolated woods. Shunning the steep servant steps, she ascends the grand marble staircase to keep the coffee perfectly steady. The upper corridor is bathed in a suffocating golden light. You and I need we recognize the brilliance in her quiet method here. In a world that demands constant attention, choosing to fly completely under the radar is a massive superpower. True survival often relies on refusing to be seen at all. The heavy wooden door looms at the corridor's end, radiating the ominous energy of a final confrontation. She freezes outside the threshold, drawing a sharp breath to rehearse the words she practiced all morning. "Good morning, sir. Your coffee." It is a tiny fragment of dialogue, yet its psychological weight is totally crushing. We have all stood before a terrifying door, paralyzed by a mundane task that suddenly feels monumental. Despite doing this daily, her palms are slick with sweat. Her stomach turns violently as she raises a trembling knuckle to strike the wood twice. The takeaway here is universally applicable. Building catastrophic scenarios in your mind always inflicts more damage than the reality waiting inside the room. Just take a deep breath and open the door. A commanding voice permits her entry, carrying a dark pull that shifts the atmosphere. She pushes the heavy oak open. Towering bookshelves frame Damon, who sits motionless in a tailored suit, his eyes surgically locked on his documents. She stammers out her rehearsed greeting, but the dawn offers only a suffocating silence. She moves across the vintage rug, desperate to leave, when the universe introduces absolute chaos. Her shoe catches the thick weave. The shift in momentum is sudden and violent. The silver tray tilts, sending boiling liquid toward the ruthless architect of the city's crime syndicate. Listen to this crucial lesson. Life inevitably tests our balance the exact moment we try our absolute hardest to walk a flawless line. You must always anticipate the sudden, terrifying drop. Bracing for impact, she forces her eyes shut, but the crash never arrives. Instead, an impenetrable grip locks around her wrist like a steel vice. The tray hovers perfectly steady. Damon intercepted her fall with lethal speed, yet he never even rose from his chair. His gaze remains anchored to his papers as he murmurs a quiet warning to watch her step. The shock totally paralyzes her vocal cords, but the true revelation is the searing heat radiating from his touch. You expect a brutal mobster to carry the chill of a grave, but his grip ignites a startling fire through her sleeve. The lesson here is profound. Our most intense human connections often strike exactly when our emotional armor is completely down. Never assume an icy exterior means a totally frozen core. For 3 agonizing beats, his fingers remain clamped around her fragile wrist. The atmosphere shifts, and time bends into a standstill. He finally releases his hold, instructing her to leave the coffee. Alina mentally retreats into survival mode, executing a stiff routine to mask her trembling. She deposits the tray, hides her shaking hands, and offers a quick bow before pivoting to flee. But here is the cinematic turn. The second she turns away, the Don raises his dark eyes to track her exit. She cannot see his stare, but she absorbs the absolute weight of it. There is a primal lesson in this vulnerability. You can always physically sense the heavy gravity of someone's intense focus burning into your spine. We must never ignore the silent alarms our intuition desperately rings. Alina practically flies down the staircase, refusing to look back. She breaches the kitchen, desperately gasping for air. Sloane studies her pale face, declaring she looks like she wrestled a phantom. Breathless, Alina confesses the near disaster with the coffee. Sloane freezes, explicitly breaking down the psychology of their ruthless boss. Catching a tray simply means protecting a rug, but deliberately gripping a maid's wrist signifies a massive shift in his dark paradigm. The lesson here is crucial. The most vital reality checks always arrive through loyal friends who refuse to sugarcoat the danger. Later, standing alone in the quiet garden, Alina is left completely tormented, unable to understand exactly why her skin still burns from his brief, intense touch. Her mornings dissolve into a numbing, invisible rhythm. Alina moves like a ghost through the massive estate, smoothing out heavy sheets and dusting towering bookshelves that nobody actually reads. Across the property, Damon is barricaded inside his private office, surrounded by armed muscle who treat him like an untouchable god. Here is a simple, meaningful life lesson we often forget. When you build your walls high enough to keep every single threat out, you also guarantee that no one will ever pull up a chair to share a warm meal with you. By 2 in the afternoon, the strict head housekeeper orders Alina to haul a mountain of fresh towels to the west wing. Her only option is the hidden servant corridor, a suffocating, windowless tunnel designed specifically so the crime bosses never have to acknowledge the people cleaning up their messes. You and I are going to unpack this scene together, because the tension here is brilliant. This narrow passageway forces anyone inside to press their shoulders right up against the cold plaster. Alina hurries through the gloom, clutching the warm stack of towels to her chest like a makeshift bulletproof vest. She rounds a blind corner beneath a dying light fixture, and she nearly crashes straight into a solid wall of muscle. It is Damon. The absolute head of this crime family is standing right there in the servant shadows. They both freeze in their tracks. Here is a simple life lesson. Fate has a funny way of backing you into a corner at the exact moment you are least prepared for a fight. Above them, that busted bulb flickers twice and burns out completely, leaving them totally trapped in the heavy, suffocating darkness. Alina grips those folded towels tight against her chin, almost hoping the cheap white cotton can shield her from the overwhelming weight of his presence. Damon goes entirely rigid. He refuses to meet her eyes, choosing instead to burn a hole into the plaster right above her shoulder. It is as if making actual eye contact would shatter the fragile mask of control keeping him in check. She can feel his breath against her hair, revealing the violent contradiction inside him. He will not reach out and touch her, but the sheer effort of holding himself back is clearly tearing him apart. Then, breaking the thick silence, he turns and fades back into the shadows. Always remember this simple life lesson. The absolute loudest noises in our lives are usually the desperate, heavy words we swallow down and choose never to speak. Alina is left standing there, completely paralyzed, her fingers digging into the towels while the sound of her own heartbeat deafens her. The corridor suddenly feels like an icebox, though that freezing chill might just be spilling out from her own unsettled mind. She finally drags her shaking legs toward the linen closet, her hands trembling so fiercely that the neatly folded stacks begin to topple. She floats through the remainder of her shift, totally hollowed out, eating dinner without tasting a single bite. By 10 o'clock, she locks herself inside her small bedroom. She leaves the curtains completely wide open, silently begging the night sky to offer some beauty above the ugly brick wall outside. Here is a simple life lesson. Relying on a rigid daily routine is often just a mask we wear to trick ourselves into believing we are still okay. Alina lies flat on her mattress, completely losing the war against her own racing thoughts. She tries desperately to scrub away the memory of how hot Swandier felt when he was standing so close to her in the dark. She wants to forget the dangerous hunger in the Mafia boss's stare and the crushing weight of everything left unsaid. She is just barely starting to drift away when the violent roar of engines rips the night wide open. Tires tear aggressively into the gravel driveway out front. A massive fleet of black vehicles smashes through the security gates at a terrifying speed. Heavy doors slam shut like gunshots. Here is a simple life lesson for all of us. You can bolt your doors against the dark all you want, but you can never truly hide from a violent storm that has already locked its sights on your soul. Let us look closely at how the tension ramps up here. Absolute chaos erupts on the ground floor. Frantic footsteps pound across the expensive hardwood, carrying the unmistakable, heavy rhythm of desperate men carrying someone completely broken. Alina bolts upright in bed. The digital clock flashes 11:47. A harsh voice barks a command in Russian, slicing right through the panic. It is Kirill, the lead enforcer, and he shouts a single English word. Doctor. The entire mansion seems to hold its breath. Alina knows right then that a top earner just came home bleeding. She stares at her ceiling for hours, waiting. Listen to this simple life lesson. Time never truly heals our deepest wounds. More often than not, time is just a cruel clock measuring the exact second our peaceful, quiet world gets ripped apart. For 2 agonizing hours, our protagonist remains practically glued to the cold metal of the floor vent. This is the vent that dropped the terrifying word, "Doctor," into her room like a bucket of freezing water. She tracks the heavy thud of boots, pacing back and forth above her. Muffled arguments in Russian bleed straight through the plaster. Too quiet to actually understand, but far too intense to ignore. She is listening to this underground empire choke on its own violent consequences. When her room's intercom finally shrieks, she already has her hand on the button. Kirill drops a cold, brutal order for her to bring the heavy trauma kit upstairs immediately. Pay attention to this simple life lesson. We usually learn the hard way that the absolute heaviest burdens we will ever carry are handed to us in the dead of night. Stick with me here, because the psychology of this moment is fascinating. She is going for the underground trauma kit, a locked bag packed with elite medical gear reserved strictly for the inner circle. She only opened this box once before, when Kirill took a blade to the face during a brutal retaliation hit. If they need it tonight, somebody highly important is bleeding out. She throws on a robe and grabs the hidden key from behind the kitchen clock. Surprisingly, her hands are completely steady. She knows that falling apart right now is a luxury she simply cannot afford. She climbs the grand staircase toward the forbidden West Wing. Here is a simple life lesson. True courage is never just the absence of fear. True courage is that heavy, terrifying realization that another human being's survival rests entirely in your hands. Picture this cinematic scene. The grand corridor is dead silent, with long, creeping shadows stretching out beneath the dim crystal lights. The armed guard outside completely ignores Alina, treating her like she is made of glass. Before she can even raise her hand to knock, Kirill physically blocks the heavy oak door. His voice drops into a low growl as he explains that the boss absolutely refused a hospital visit. A rival blade caught Damon in the side, slicing violently through the muscle. Handing her that bag means the syndicate's doctor is miles away, and nobody else has the nerve to stitch up a bleeding Don. Kirill steps aside, gesturing to the bathroom. Listen to this simple life lesson. Sometimes, stepping up to clean up the mess when everyone else cowers in fear is the only actual way to secure your survival in a ruthless world. She hugs the heavy trauma kit tight to her chest and steps carefully across the expensive Persian rug. And right there, sitting on the edge of the cold marble bathtub, is Damon. The literal head of the crime family is shirtless and barefoot. His tailored dress, pants soaked dark, terrifying crimson down his left leg. A ruined, bloody towel sits abandoned on the floor. That deep wound carved into his side is severe enough to make Alina forget how to draw breath. Yet, when he looks up at her, his face is perfectly washed and his dark hair is slicked back. His icy gray eyes hold a terrifying, absolute calm. Remember this simple life lesson. The loudest men in the room are always a distraction, because the absolute most dangerous people on earth are the quiet ones who view their own intense suffering as nothing more than a minor passing inconvenience. Close the door, the boss orders. His voice surprisingly soft. Alina drops straight to her knees, spreading sterile medical supplies across the edge of the tub. In the ruthless machine of this crime syndicate, a maid who can silently patch up knife wounds is an incredibly valuable asset. Damon rests his heavy hands on his knees, forcing his breathing into a slow, calculated rhythm. Up close, Alina is forced to witness the brutal reality of his violent empire. He wears the massive ink of a wolf across his chest, a harsh mark you only earn by spilling blood. His skin is a living map of old street wars. She grabs the cold saline, takes a deep breath, and quietly warns him that this is going to hurt. Remember this simple life lesson. The absolute deepest, most painful scars people carry are usually the ones they keep locked securely beneath the surface. You have to appreciate the pure psychological weight of this standoff. Alina is literally pouring freezing liquid salines straight into Damon's open flesh. And the man does not even blink. Only his thick fingers flex against his knee, calculating his own ridiculous pain tolerance. She is desperately trying to focus on the stitches, fighting to ignore his intense, unreadable stare. But the silence gets too heavy, and she slips up, asking who did this to him. Damon goes unteacherly cold, stating calmly that it was a man who actually believed he would live to see tomorrow. When she quietly asks if that man made it, Damon just drops a dead, silent no. It gives you absolute chills. Look, here is the lesson. You either learn to keep your hands steady when the pressure is suffocating you, or you end up exactly like the guy who never lived to see the morning sun. You and I are about to witness a masterclass in the psychology of power. Alina focuses on her task, drawing each stitch with clinical precision. Damon endures the brutal procedure with the stoicism of carved marble. Then his deep voice fractures the heavy silence. For the first time in 2 grueling years, he speaks her actual name. She freezes instantly, the needle suspended in midair. In this hierarchy, being perceived is far more dangerous than being ignored. She forces a trembling thank you, but he coldly clarifies it is merely an observation. He remains motionless as she applies the white gauze. Consider this simple truth. When a ruthless force finally acknowledges your existence, it is never a reward. It simply means you have stepped onto their radar. Alina attempts to gather her medical supplies and retreat, desperate to rebuild her boundaries. But the syndicate leader shatters that illusion. Damon reaches out, his heavy hand locking around her wrist like a steel vice. The dynamic has fundamentally shifted. He is no longer distracted by the burdens of his criminal empire. His storm-gray eyes anchor directly onto hers, pulling her into his suffocating gravity. She kneels mere inches from his exposed chest, aware of the violent pulse beating against his throat. Slowly, his predatory gaze descends to her lips, and she forgets how to draw breath. The lesson here is undeniable. The most lethal traps in life do not resemble dark alleys or iron cages. They look exactly like the intense gaze of someone who intends to consume you. His grip softens, sliding up to trace the line of her jaw. We spent decades building emotional walls, yet a single moment of perceived tenderness can dismantle them entirely. For 23 years, Alina has never been handled like something fragile. In this intimate space, her defenses evaporate. His face drifts closer, stealing the oxygen from the room. She feels the harsh rhythm of his breathing, the dark scent of his violent world pulling her under. In a deep, devastating act of surrender, her eyes slip shut. But the collision never happens. He freezes. His thumb remains anchored to her skin, paralyzed by his own internal war. Remember this truth. Sometimes, the most agonizing distance between 2 people is merely a single breath they are too terrified to take. Let us examine this collision of souls. Damon remains still, waiting for Alina to meet his storm-gray eyes. When he speaks, his voice is wrecked by the emotional toll. He confesses she has no concept of how lethal it is to stand this close to him. This man, casually bleeding out hours ago, is now undone by vulnerability. Slowly, he withdraws his hand, allowing his thumb to graze her cheek. That phantom touch is the true weapon, tearing her emotional armor to shreds. Suppressing his agony, he turns his broad back and dismisses her. She remains paralyzed on the floor. Pay attention to this dynamic. The most devastating blows in life do not come from a clenched fist. They arrive in the quiet, tender moments that strip away your defenses and leave you completely exposed. Alina grips her medical kit so fiercely it cuts into her skin. Fleeing the room, she faces another psychological barrier, Kirill. The enforcer watches from the shadows, analyzing her fractured state. Silence hangs between them, thick and suffocating. Clutching the kit like a shield, she descends the staircase like a ghost. She reaches the dark kitchen just as her strength evaporates. Sloane sits quietly at 3 a.m, understanding the rules of trauma. She offers a chair without a single question. As Alina collapses, the massive adrenaline crash hits, sending violent tremors through her spine. Here is a harsh truth of human endurance. Surviving terror requires iron focus, but the true emotional collapse only strikes the exact second you finally reach a safe harbor. Sloane slides a warm mug across the table, honoring her promise of silence. She waits until Alina takes a trembling sip. Sloane's perceptive eyes reveal everything. She recognizes a woman desperately lying to herself. For the next 2 days, Alina endures pure psychological warfare. The Dons transforms into a phantom, treating her like empty. Doors shut sharply in her face, and her duties are reassigned with zero explanation. The brutal reality settles in. She brushed too close to his emotional wounds, so he constructed an iron vault to shut her out. It is a painful realization we all must face. You cannot force your way into a locked heart when the other person refuses to turn the key. But pay attention, because by the second afternoon, this entire narrative violently fractures. Alina is sent outside to sign for a symbolic delivery. She holds a massive floral arrangement, pure white lilies fading into bruised, almost black roses. It is a striking visual metaphor for innocence consumed by corruption. Suddenly, a predatory engine shatters the quiet estate. A black luxury sedan tears across the gravel, braking aggressively at the stairs. The air temperature seems to plummet. A woman steps from the vehicle, radiating the cold authority of an apex predator. She wears a sweeping crimson coat, sharp black heels, and lips painted the shade of fresh violence. Let this serve as a crucial warning. Sometimes the greatest threat to your peace does not arrive kicking the door off its hinges. It glides elegantly up your driveway, draped in luxury leather and designer heels. We can recognize the terrifying confidence of someone accustomed to ruling the underworld. Spotting Alina, this woman flashes a smile entirely devoid of warmth. Her voice is thick, with an intimidating accent as she demands immediate labor. Alina holds her ground to ask for a name. The woman weaponizes her identity instantly. Zoya Ivanov, a guest of the family. Zoya does not pause for an invitation. She marches up the steps and throws open the massive doors as if she owns the syndicate. Without breaking stride, she shoves her designer luggage directly into Alina's chest, ordering her to announce her arrival to the Don. Here is a fundamental law of human dominance. True power never politely knocks on the front door. It simply walks straight in and expects you to carry the heavy baggage. Alina stands stranded on the porch, balancing ominous flowers and a heavy designer bag. The freezing wind bites her skin, but the suffocating trace of Zoya's perfume makes her shiver. It operates as grim foreshadowing. This antagonist has breached the sanctum, and Alina is entirely unprepared for the resulting chaos. By the next morning, the tension only thickens. The breakfast room functions less like a dining area and more like an interrogation chamber. It is a suffocating space filled with blinding sunlight and tall windows staring out at dead gardens. At exactly 7:30, the silver trays roll out. Alina despises this room, and you are about to see why. Always remember this. The brightest, most illuminated spaces are exactly where the darkest psychological games are executed. The floor of this breakfast room is the total absence of shadows. Sunlight blasts through the glass, exposing the staff while syndicate guests observe them, as if they were merely breathing furniture. Today, the atmosphere is lethal. Alina steps inside, balancing a heavy tray of coffee. Unsurprisingly, Zoya has already claimed dominance. She sits in a vicious black gown, legs crossed, pretending to read a book for pure theatrical effect. That toxic crimson lipstick is freshly applied for maximum psychological damage. 2 terrified maids are already caught in her suffocating orbit, completely immobilized by fear. Here is a vital observation to carry with you. When a predator appears to be casually relaxing, that is precisely the moment they are calculating their most devastating strike. You and I have probably felt that suffocating shift in air pressure before a confrontation. The other maids huddle near the buffet, But the true danger observes from the doorway. Kirill, the top enforcer, leans against the frame, nursing a coffee. This is a massive red flag. A man of his caliber never positions himself anywhere by coincidence. Alina draws a ragged breath, sets down her tray, and murmurs a polite greeting. Zoya slowly raises her cold eyes, purring a cruel demand for coffee. Gripping the heavy pot, Alina walks straight into the jaws of this social trap. Astonishingly, not a single drop spills. Her hands are literal ice. Remember this. The most profound victories in life happen in quiet moments when you absolutely refuse to let your enemy see you tremble. You and I are about to unpack a masterclass in psychological warfare. Notice how Zoe deliberately stretches the silence. Her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around the porcelain cup. She weaponizes the quiet before dropping her insult, mocking Alina's cool-used hands as the ugly mark of cheap labor. Zoya twists the blade, declaring that the Volkov crime syndicate only values women untouched by hard work. It is a venomous display of toxic elitism. Alina is forced to swallow the bitter humiliation, burying her pride to survive. In the shadows, Kirill stands completely frozen, a silent witness to this brutal social execution. Here is a vital truth to remember. Never let a public insult shatter your composure, because your enemies are simply waiting for the moment you finally break. The cruelty here relies entirely on the bystanders. Olga stares blankly at the wall, complicit through her silence. Zoya delivers her blow in flawless English, her tone as casual as a weather report, while a burning flush creeps up Alina's neck. The true agony is enduring this abuse on a public stage. Desperate, Alina asks if they need anything else, met only with Zoya's sugary dismissal. As Alina grabs her tray to flee, Kirill suddenly blocks her path. Breaking a 2-year vow of silence, he delivers a chilling metaphor. He states that calluses on a worker's hands are decorations on a castle wall, and the wall falls first. The lesson today is clear. Words cut significantly deeper when an audience is watching, so you must always build your emotional armor incredibly thick. In the kitchen, Sloane is violently kneading a mound of dough, elbows dusted in white flour. Sensing the dark shift in the atmosphere, she demands to know exactly what Zoya did. When Alina confesses the cruel remarks, Sloane does not blink. She vows to spit in Zoya's coffee, promising to coordinate the entire staff to do the same. This absurdity shatters the heavy tension, allowing a genuine laugh to escape Alina's chest. Slumping onto a stool, Alina studies her own hands. She traces the thick ridge on her thumb and the faded scar earned during her 3rd grueling month in this cursed mansion. They are physical monuments of her survival. The lesson here is timeless. A fiercely loyal friend who is ready to go to war for your dignity is the absolute greatest treasure you can ever find. The tragic history etched into her skin reveals everything. Years ago, a housekeeper gave Alina a healing salve, warning her to suffer in absolute silence. These are the battered hands of a survivor from the gritty streets of Chicago. These hands scrubbed floors at 17 to keep her brother in school and buried her mother at 18. At 21, she walked through the terrifying gates of the Volkov estate, a Mafia dynasty whose name is whispered in dark alleys. She understood the lethal underworld she was entering, warned that nobody leaves that house unchanged. Yet, she surrendered her freedom to wire money directly to Callum. The life lesson is profoundly simple. Real sacrifice means willingly walking into the raging fire so that someone you love can safely stay warm. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? Her brother is 17 now and depends entirely on her survival. When the world tries to destroy you, knowing who you take the hits for becomes your ultimate armor. In the kitchen, Sloane jokes about brewing Zoya's coffee weak to spark a dramatic resignation. It is brilliant comedy, and Alina finally laughs. But this piece is a fragile illusion. By noon, the dining table is set for 5. Consigliere Grigory Rostov audaciously claims the right side, Damon's traditional power throne. Meanwhile, Kirill stands like a grim reaper behind the master chair. The life lesson here: always enjoy the quiet moments of laughter while you can, because a destructive storm is always brewing just around the corner. Notice the sheer audacity on display. Zoya plants herself on Damon's left side, projecting false ownership over the kingpin. 2 mobsters whisper in Russian, while Alina performs her invisible ghost routine. The piece shatters when Zoya taps her crystal wine glass. Locking cruel eyes on Alina, she switches to English to maximize the drama. She asks Damon if this is the maid hired merely to serve coffee, faking pity about her rough hands. The room flatlines into a suffocating silence. Alina pours water for the consigliere without shaking, but the oxygen simply vanishes. Behind the boss, Kirill shifts his deadly gaze from Zoya's smirk to Damon's frozen reaction. The simple lesson? Arrogance always makes you completely blind to the lethal trap you just walked into. We have all seen how real power operates. It never needs to scream. Damon places his silverware down with agonizing precision. That tiny clink against the plate echoes like a judge dropping a gavel. Turning to Zoya, his voice carries a chill that freezes the wine in her glass. He states that Alina has worked for him for 2 years, while Zoya is merely a guest. He delivers a calm, brutal warning. If she insults a worker in his house again, she will eat breakfast elsewhere permanently. Zoya panics, gasping for air like a fish on a dock, frantically trying to formulate an excuse. Damon shuts her down, repeating his cold question until she whimpers a terrified yes. The lesson here is absolute fire. True authority never needs to raise its voice. It simply demands to be respected. Zoya whines his name, but Damon delivers a cold dismissal. He resumes eating, acting as if he didn't just plunge the room into freezing territory. Across the table, Consigliere Grigory stares at his plate, but his mouth twitches. That tiny spasm is the closest that hardened mobster ever comes to a smile. Beside Alina, Olga finally releases a massive breath. Alina continues serving, hands steady like a professional, keeping her gaze locked on the floor. Deep inside, her racing heartbeat finally settles into a calm rhythm. Finding a sliver of safety inside a room packed with dangerous monsters is often the only peace you get. That is a profound life lesson. Just as she slips out with her tray, Damon lifts his head and stares directly at her. She refuses to look back, but his stare burns a hole into the back of her neck. She is no longer the invisible ghost she trained to be. Seeking refuge, she hides inside the music room, her ultimate safe zone. A black piano sits untouched on a midnight blue rug, an instrument nobody in this violent family ever plays. She quietly opens the lid, wipes the dusty keys down, and gently closes it, finding pure comfort in caring for forgotten things. The life lesson here is deep. It is a tragic truth that we often give the most profound love to the broken things left behind by others. Around 7 that evening, the mansion's silence is violently shattered by the roar of heavy engines. 2 cars, then 3. Kirill storms down the staircase, with 3 muscle guys trailing him, Damon right on his heels. Damon's jacket is buttoned tight, his eyes locked onto some violent destination. He is fully in boss mode. Alina watches from the window, tracking the headlights vanishing past the iron gates. She whispers into the glass, asking where they are going. Sloane sighs and drops a brutal truth bomb. warning they are heading somewhere she does not want to know about. We are often taught that ignorance is a weakness, but the life lesson here is different. Sometimes, not knowing the dark details is the only psychological shield you have left. Alina tries to sleep, but her nervous system is trapped in pure panic mode. It is nearly 3 a.m. when the cars finally roll back in. The tires chew the gravel in a slow, ominous rhythm. A single door slams violently, and frantic footsteps rush the side entrance. Stick with me, because you and I both know that terrifying feeling of late-night panic, that sudden chill freezing your blood. Alina recognizes Kirill's bark outside, screaming at his men to carry something upstairs. Shaking, she throws her robe on and slips down the dark staircase. The kitchen is dead silent. Alina creeps through the shadows, her heartbeat echoing like a bass drum. She reaches the main hall at the exact moment the men drag themselves inside. Damon is leading the pack. He is still on his feet, but his posture is brutally crooked. His white shirt is soaked with blood on his right shoulder. It is crusted at the top, but bright red as it drips down his arm. The life lesson here? Sometimes, sheer human curiosity is a dangerous trap that inevitably pulls us right into the center of a deadly storm. Damon's hollow eyes stare into some hellish dimension. One bloody hand clamps his ruined shoulder. His other arm hangs limp, fingernails painted crimson. Kirill hovers behind him, gripping the boss's elbow to keep him upright, followed by 2 battered guards. Terrified, Alina shrinks back, pressing her spine against the freezing wall. As Damon staggers past, his head slowly turns. Those freezing gray eyes lock onto hers for one infinite second. She sees the raw agony he is desperately trying to swallow, and he sees her witnessing his vulnerability. Yet, his pride ensures he never breaks his grueling stride. Here is a major life lesson. The absolute greatest burdens in life are the painful weights we stubbornly refuse to let anyone else carry. He vanishes upstairs, and that bedroom door slams violently shut. Alina đứng chôn chân giữa hành lang, lồng ngực thắt lại đến mức gần như quên, mất cách hô hấp. 2 phút trôi qua tựa như một thế kỷ đọa đầy. Đột nhiên, Kirill lao xuống cầu thang như một cơn lốc. Lầm bầm tiếng Nga qua bộ đàm. Gã gầm lên bằng tiếng Anh, ra lệnh cho cô phải ở yên trong bếp. Gã chẳng buồn liếc nhìn cô, chỉ sủa lên những mệnh lệnh lạnh lẽo rằng bác sĩ đang đến và ngài trùm Damon không muốn bất kỳ ai lảng vảng trên lầu. Tiếng lốp xe rít lên xé toạc màn đêm, rồi một sự im lặng ngột ngạt lập tức nuốt chửng lấy căn biệt thự khổng lồ. Alina lững thững bước về bếp như một bóng ma bắt gặp Sloan đang ngồi tĩnh lặng với ly nước trên tay. Ánh mắt Sloan dò hỏi, và Alina chỉ dám thầm thì rằng vai của anh ấy đã trúng đạn. Bài học ở đây rất rõ ràng, những rắc rối và tổn thương sâu thẳm luôn để lại một âm vang đầy ám ảnh, ngay cả khi những tiếng gầm thét đã chìm vào hư vô. Hôm nay, các bạn và tôi sẽ cùng nhau phân tích thật sâu vào khoảnh khắc này. Sloan hỏi liệu tình hình có tồi tệ lắm không, nhưng Alina chỉ biết lẩm bẩm rằng bản thân mình hoàn toàn mù tịt. Bầu không khí trong bếp nặng nề đến mức có thể nghiền nát cả đá tảng. Sloan khuyên Alina đi ngủ, nhưng giấc ngủ lúc này là điều bất khả thi. Alina thu mình trong phòng, toàn thân run rẩy vì căng thẳng. Ngay trước 5 giờ sáng, cô chợt nghe thấy một âm thanh kỳ lạ. Không phải tiếng bước chân hay cửa cọt kẹt, mà là một tiếng rên rỉ u tối, vỡ nát vang vọng xuống từ ống thông gió của phòng ngủ chính. Một âm thanh tàn bạo của một kẻ đang chết chìm trong đau đớn. Cô bật tung người khỏi giường. Đôi khi, cuộc sống dạy chúng ta rằng dù bạn có cố gắng chôn vùi nỗi đau sâu đến đâu, nó vẫn luôn tìm được cách để gào thét giữa màn đêm. Alina hiểu quá rõ sự tàn khốc của vết thương do đạn bắn đó. Cô đã nhìn thấy máu tuôn ra, và giờ đây, ông trùm của thế giới ngầm lại tự nhốt mình trong bóng tối đơn độc. Gã bác sĩ lậu đã không xuất hiện, bởi tiếng xe lăn trên sỏi sẽ phá hỏng vỏ bọc an toàn của họ. Nếu Damon đang chảy máu đến chết trên đó, Alina chính là người duy nhất biết được sự thật. Cô nhảy khỏi giường và vô lấy chiếc chìa khóa tủ thuốc. Đôi tay Ron lầy bầy. Nhưng cô vẫn kiên quyết sắp xếp một khay bạc với nước đá, khăn ăn tắm, băng gạc và thuốc sát trùng. Sau đó cô lén lút bước qua những bậc cầu thang, tối tăm hoàn toàn bằng trí nhớ. 2 năm sống trong im lặng đã dạy cô biết rõ vị trí của từng tiếng cọt kẹt trên sàn gỗ. Điều này chứng minh một chân lý. Lòng dũng cảm không phải là không biết sợ, mà là lựa chọn bước tới giúp đỡ người khác, ngay cả khi bạn đang khiếp sợ tột cùng. Hãy cùng tôi bóc tách chi tiết đầy ẩn ý này. Khu cánh tây của biệt thự đang chìm trong ánh sáng nhờ ma mái. Gã vệ sĩ khổng lồ thường gác ở đây đã biến mất, bị đuổi đi khi ông chủ của hắn loạng choạng bước lên lầu. Alina lướt qua tấm thảm dày mà không tạo ra bất kỳ tiếng động nào. Cô tiến đến phòng ngủ chính và đứng sững lại. Cánh cửa gỗ sồi nặng nề đang hé mở, hắt một dải ánh sáng vàng vọt xuống sàn nhà. Trong thế giới tàn khốc của băng đảng Volkov, cánh cửa hoặc khóa chặt kín mít hoặc mở toang hoàn toàn, không bao giờ có sự lấp lửng. Bởi một cánh cửa hé mở đồng nghĩa với sai lầm chí mạng. Nó nhắc nhở chúng ta một điều: phơi bày điểm yếu xung quanh những kẻ độc hại là một rủi ro chết người. Chính sự sơ hở trong những khoảnh khắc yếu lòng nhất lại là thứ dễ dàng đưa những ông chủ máu lạnh như Damon thẳng tiến xuống đáy vực sâu. Tâm trí cô quay cuồng về gã bác sĩ ảo ảnh kia. Hắn ta chưa bao giờ đến. Chắc chắn kẻ nào đó đã thực hiện sơ cứu một cách vụng về rồi vội vã bỏ chạy mà quên không đóng chặt cánh cửa. Rất có thể đó chính là Kirill. Gã tay sai đã hấp tấp rời đi vì nhận lệnh phải để ngài đôn lại một mình. Alina hít một hơi thật sâu, cố nén sự run rẩy và áp tai vào mặt gỗ. Những gì cô nghe thấy tiếp theo thực sự ám ảnh. Đó không phải là tiếng rên rỉ đau đớn thông thường, mà là âm thanh thô ráp, hoang dã của sự tuyệt vọng cùng cực đang nghiến qua kẽ răng. Người đàn ông đó đang chịu đựng một sự đọa đầy tột độ. Khoảnh khắc này dạy chúng ta một sự thật về nhân loại. Cơ thể vật lý thường nhận ra khi chúng ta đã vỡ vụn. Rất lâu trước khi bộ não bướng bỉnh, chịu thừa nhận rằng chúng ta thực sự cần một ai đó đến và cứu rỗi cuộc đời mình. Mọi bản năng sinh tồn đang gào thét bắt cô phải bỏ chạy, trốn nấp vào bếp và giả vờ như đêm kinh hoàng này chưa từng tồn tại. Nhưng lòng trắc ẩn luôn có sức mạnh hoang dại, đủ sức đánh gục mọi logic thông thường. Cô tựa người vào lớp gỗ nặng nề và đẩy nó mở ra thêm một chút, khiếp sợ những gì sắp phải chứng kiến. Và rồi, anh hiện ra trước mắt cô. Damon nằm gục trên chiếc giường khổng lồ dưới ánh sáng yếu ớt của ngọn đèn. Chiếc áo sơ mi đã biến mất, chiếc quần đắt tiền xộc xệch, thắt lưng bung mở. Một ai đó đã dán miếng gạc đẫm máu lên vết thương ở vai anh và nó đang dần tuột xuống. Đầu anh ngửa ra sau thành giường, mang vẻ cam chịu hoàn toàn. Đây là một minh chứng mạnh mẽ rằng bất kể bạn khoác lên mình vỏ bọc bất khả xâm phạm đến mức nào, nỗi đau khổ chân thực cuối cùng sẽ bắt tất cả chúng ta phải cúi đầu khuất phục. Lồng ngực ông trùm giật lên theo từng nhịp thở rách nát. Tuyệt vọng cầu xin sự giải thoát khỏi ngọn lửa đang thiêu đốt trên vai. Lớp mặt nạ Mafia lạnh lùng mà anh khoác lên người mỗi ngày giờ đã hoàn toàn tan biến. Hàm răng anh nghiến chặt và những tổn thương kinh hoàng của đêm nay hằn sâu trên khuôn mặt. Anh không hề hay biết cô đang đứng đó trong bóng tối. Trước khi Alina kịp lèn đi, một tiếng thì thầm hoang dại không chút phòng bị đã trượt ra khỏi cổ họng anh. Anh khẽ gọi, Alina. Thật đáng sợ khi linh hồn chúng ta luôn biết chính xác mình cần ai nhất khi thế giới sụp đổ. Cái tên ấy làm cô tê liệt. Chiếc khay bạc trượt khỏi tay, bình nước vỡ toang trên sàn nhà, và hộp gạc rơi xuống vang lên như một phát súng. Đôi mắt xám lạnh lẽo của Damon lập tức bật mở, nhìn chăm chăm thẳng vào cô. Các bạn có thấy không, thời gian lúc này dường như đã bị đóng băng hoàn toàn. Đây chính là giây phút mà mọi ranh giới đều đổ vỡ. Không một ai dám thở mạnh lấy một nhịp. Kẻ thống trị khét tiếng của chúng ta vẫn kẹt trong tư thế yếu ớt nhất, Đôi mắt xám sắc bén ghim chặt vào đống lộn xộn trên sàn nhà. Ở phía bên kia, Alina run rẩy túm chặt lấy vạt áo choàng. Cô hoảng loạn tột độ, tìm cách lấp liếm bằng một lời nói dối yếu ớt rằng mình chưa thấy gì cả. Nhưng ngài Don đâu có bị qua mặt dễ dàng. Anh không nhúc nhích, chỉ buông một câu trầm khàn rợn, người cảnh báo cô không nên nói dối. Đó là âm thanh của một con dã thú nhận ra lớp vỏ bọc hoàn hảo của mình đã bị tước đoạt. Thực tế chứng minh rằng đôi khi sự thật trần trụi và đau đớn nhất lại chính là thứ duy nhất giúp những tâm hồn rạn nứt kết nối với nhau. Hãy suy ngẫm về điều này. Trong những đêm tối kịch tính, con người ta thường chọn cách bỏ chạy hoặc tự đâm đầu vào rắc rối. Theo lẽ thường, Alina nên quay đầu chuồn thẳng để sống nốt phần đời còn lại như chưa từng mở cánh cửa oan nghiệt đó. Nhưng đôi chân cô lại cứng đơ như hóa đá. Cô thều thào hỏi tại sao anh lại cố tình né tránh cô suốt 3 ngày qua. Damon nhắm nghiền đôi mắt mệt mỏi, và khi anh mở chúng ra, cái mặt nạ tàn nhẫn anh đeo suốt 2 năm trời đã vỡ vụn hoàn toàn. Anh thú nhận mọi thứ chỉ bằng một từ duy nhất. Khoảnh khắc ấy, cô bàng hoàng nhận ra anh đã thấu tỏ mọi bí mật từ tận 2 năm trước. Đôi chân cô như muốn khuỵu xuống. Bài học quý giá ở đây là gì? Chạy trốn chưa bao giờ là cách giải quyết triệt để. Chỉ khi bạn dám đứng lại và đối diện với sự thật, đó mới là lúc cuộc đời thực sự bước sang trang mới. Lúc này, Damon cố gắng đổi tư thế, nhưng cơn đau xé thịt từ vết thương khiến anh phải nhăn mặt. Anh gầm gừ cay đắng rằng bất kỳ người phụ nữ nào dính líu đến, anh đều sẽ biến thành bia ngắm, và anh tuyệt đối không muốn kéo một tâm hồn thuần khiết như cô vào cái thế giới ngầm đẫm máu này. Nhưng Alina ngay lập tức bật lại. Cô sắc sảo mắng anh không có tư cách tự quyết định thay cô, càng không có quyền coi cô là một kẻ yếu đuối. Sự phản kháng đó đã làm vỡ nát hoàn toàn giọng điệu thép của ông trùm. Anh thú nhận rằng mình đã đánh mất lý trí, không thể kiểm soát được bước chân vô thức tự tìm đến bên cô. Các bạn ạ, dù chúng ta có tỏ ra gai góc đến đâu, tình yêu luôn có cách đánh gục những bức tường kiên cố nhất. Trái tim, con người vốn dĩ luôn chứa đựng những lý lẽ bướng bỉnh mà khối óc sắc bén đến mấy cũng chẳng thể nào giải mã. Chúng ta đang đi đến đỉnh điểm của cuộc đối đầu tâm lý này. Damon kể lại khoảnh khắc anh vô thức bước vào phòng và tự chốt cửa từ lúc nào không hay. Bầu không khí căng như dây đàn khi Alina kiên định bước tới cuối giường. Đôi mắt xám nhạt của ông trùm giờ đây tối sầm lại như một cơn bão dữ. Bỏ qua mọi sợ hãi, Alina tuyên bố thẳng thừng rằng cô đến đây để thay băng và tuyệt đối sẽ không rời đi. Damon nhắm nghiền mắt, cam chịu sự giằng xé nội tâm cực độ. Cuối cùng, anh chậm rãi đưa bàn tay trái không bị thương về phía cô. Khẽ gọi cô bước tới, cô đã làm theo ngay lập tức. Cuộc sống chính là như vậy đấy. Khi một người sẵn sàng gỡ bỏ lớp áo, giáp phòng bị để cho bạn thấy sự yếu đuối sâu thẳm nhất của họ, cách tuyệt vời nhất mà chúng ta có thể làm là dũng cảm bước tới và nắm chặt lấy đôi bàn tay đang chơi vơi ấy. Bàn tay nhỏ bé của cô khẽ chạm vào đôi bàn tay chằng chịt sẹo của người đàn ông. Anh kéo cô lại gần với một sự dịu dàng khó tin, thứ mà không ai nghĩ một gã giang hồ máu lạnh có thể sở hữu. Tấm nệm lún xuống dưới sức nặng của cô. Ở cự ly này, mùi hương của anh là sự pha trộn ám ảnh giữa mùi máu tanh nồng, hương nước hoa nam tính và mồ hôi lạnh toát. Vết thương chí mạng trên vai anh vẫn đang rỉ máu dưới lớp gạc. Cô lướt nhìn những đường khâu tinh xảo do chính tay mình xử lý vài ngày trước, như một dấu ấn vĩnh cửu cô để lại trên da thịt anh. Rồi anh chậm rãi vuốt về khuôn mặt cô, lùa những ngón tay thô ráp qua mái tóc, ân cần vén đi những lọn tóc lòa xòa. Thật kỳ lạ đúng không? Những sợi dây liên kết sâu sắc nhất của đời người thường được rèn rúa trong chính những khoảnh khắc tĩnh lặng nhất, khi chúng ta toàn tâm chăm sóc vết thương cho nhau. Damon lowers his voice, offering her one final chance to walk away from his dark world. Alina does not blink, locking her gaze onto his to confirm she understands the gravity of her choice. When he leans in, the kiss shatters the frantic illusions she built over 2 agonizing years It is slow and meticulously careful. This is the touch of a man who has restrained his hunger so long he refuses to make a single mistake. His warmth makes her feel beautifully small, yet entirely whole. His scarred hand traces her collar to untie her silk robe with total patience. Let us look at this together, shall we? True devotion is rarely found in a reckless rush forward. The most powerful proof of genuine love is often the quiet, unwavering patience to simply wait. He slides her robe down as if disarming a volatile explosive, peeling away the emotional armor she has carried for years. She wears a simple frayed slip, yet this ruthless Mafia Don looks at her like she is adorned in priceless silk. He whispers against her lips, noting the tremor in her breath. Alina confesses she is not shaking from fear, and he knows it is the truth. He guides her back against the mattress with astonishing gentleness, treating a woman forged in iron as though she were fragile glass. There are no words in this heavy silence, only the raw tension of his fingers tracing her pulse. It is easy to forget that opening up completely carries massive risk. But total vulnerability becomes a beautiful triumph when you hand it over to someone who has truly earned it. He hovers above her, supporting his own weight to protect her from his physical dominance. Here is a feared syndicate leader, chest still wrapped in gauze from a fresh bullet wound, treating her like royalty. He asks if she is all right, his voice stripped of its usual brutal command. When he promises to take things slow, it is a sworn oath. The moment she sharply inhales, he freezes, turning to stone until she finally exhales. Only then do their fingers interlace against the sheets. The image of a scar-eyed enforcer locking hands with her is a brilliant contrast. We must remember the true nature of authority. True strength is never about how violently you can crush your enemies in the dark. Real power is found in knowing exactly when to soften your hands and choose absolute gentleness. The pacing shifts to her rhythm, allowing her quiet authority to guide them. Alina keeps her eyes open, terrified of missing the unguarded emotion breaking across his hardened features. He speaks her name softly, like a weary traveler discovering an oasis. She exhales his name in return, and Damon responds with a single word: mine. This is not the toxic possession of a criminal. This is a blood-stained enforcer surrendering his soul, unlocking a vault he kept sealed for decades. She releases his grip, only to cradle his bruised jaw, anchoring him in the present. This exchange reveals a vital truth about connection. Affection cannot survive behind steel walls. It only truly begins the exact moment we find the courage to lower our weapons and drop our oldest defenses. Damon leans into her touch, fracturing the psychological atmosphere of the room. This is not an explosion of passion, but a silent tidal wave washing away the grim history of his violent life. The noise of the outside world vanishes, leaving nothing but their ragged breathing and that unspoken vow hanging in the dark. He lingers there for an eternity, pressing his forehead against hers, exhausted by the weight of his own surrender. Neither is willing to shatter this fragile peace. When he finally shifts his weight, he pulls her seamlessly against his chest, brushing her cheek with a scarred thumb. Notice the absence of grand declarations here. A profound, shared silence between two fractured souls will always speak volumes louder than the most poetic confession a person could ever write. Damon murmurs that everything is all right, offering her space to cry. It is a rare mercy in his grim world, but she refuses. Then, the impossible occurs. Damon Volkov actually smiles. This is the first genuine break in his stoic facade in 2 brutal years. It is a subtle curve of his mouth, but it is entirely hers. He pulls her against his uninjured side, Letting her hear his heartbeat drumming beneath an old knife scar, he turns off the lamp, telling her to rest. When she asks if he will sleep, his hesitant reply reveals the ghosts of his insomnia. Yet, his grip on her hand never loosens until dawn. We spend so much time searching for a safe sanctuary on a map, but true peace is never a physical location. It's simply the person we choose to hold on to when the lights finally go out. It is that fragile blue hour before dawn, and the crime boss lies completely motionless, his chest rising in a steady rhythm. His grip has softened slightly in sleep, yet they remain tethered together. Right here in the shadows, her past trauma begins whispering lies. She contemplates slipping out, taking the cold servant stairs to escape before he can open his eyes and regret the entire night. She has been broken before, knowing how a man's tenderness can turn to ice under the morning sun. Panic tightens her throat, and she attempts to pull away. But instantly, his hand clamps down on hers with the force of a vice. It is a profound reminder that our deepest fears are often just heavy ghosts trying to rob us of the quiet truth waiting in our brand new mornings. Without opening his eyes, he lets out a low grumble, demanding she stay exactly where she is. With one heavy motion, he pulls her firmly against his chest, throwing an arm across her waist, as if she is the only thing keeping him grounded. He falls back asleep, claiming her with absolute finality. You and I both know the cardinal rule of this brutal underworld. Nobody dares to touch what the boss claims as his own. When she finally wakes up, the room is flooded with bright sunlight and Damon is already gone. She sits up, scanning his massive bedroom, and suddenly, the imposing space feels entirely ordinary. We spend so much time building terrifying monsters in the pitch black, forgetting that the morning sun can easily chase those same shadows right out the open window. Notice the brilliant psychological power move he leaves behind. Folded at the foot of the bed is Damon's oversized silk shirt. As she slips it on, the heavy scent of his expensive cologne envelops her entirely. In his syndicate, clothing is armor, and she wears it like a deliberate badge of honor. Instead of scurrying down the hidden servant stairs like someone terrified of gossip, she descends the grand main staircase with absolute purpose. She made her choice in the dark, and she refuses to shrink in the daylight. She walks into the kitchen, greeted by the smell of fresh coffee and Sloane cooking at the stove. True courage is simply looking around and deciding that your own quiet truth matters infinitely more than the petty judgment of the crowd. Sloane hears the heavy kitchen door open and immediately freezes. The spoon actually slips from her fingers as she turns. Staring in disbelief at Alina standing there with tangled bedhead and bare feet, Sloane can barely manage a whisper, pointing out that Alina is casually wearing a hook worth a month of rent and smelling exactly like the crime boss. She demands to know if she is really seeing what she thinks she is seeing. Alina opens her mouth to confess, but she never gets the chance. Damon Volkov himself strides effortlessly into the room, shifting the entire power dynamic of the massive estate with just his quiet presence. We can try to conceal our deepest attachments, but eventually the raw, undeniable truth always finds a way to walk right through the front door. Picture the sheer tension in this morning scene. Damon moves with a predator's grace, his white shirt unbuttoned to reveal fresh bandages. Alina watches him, wondering if this ruthless man stitched his own wounds in the dark. He scans the room, owning every inch of the floor beneath his boots. Reaching for a mug, he catches Alina's gaze with a sharp raise of his eyebrow, and she offers a tiny nod. As he moves past, his bruised knuckles brush her skin. He drops a rough, gravelly greeting that entirely changes the air in the room, and she whispers it back. They hold eye contact for one heavy beat before he vanishes down the hall. True intimacy rarely needs shouting. It usually blooms loudest in these perfectly quiet, unspoken moments. The second Damon leaves, Sloane finally thaws out. She releases a shaky breath and collapses onto a wooden stool. For 10 excruciating seconds, the room is filled with ringing silence. Sloane stares at Alina with terrified eyes, nervously muttering that the coffee must be too strong today. It is a brilliant defense mechanism, deflecting from the suffocating tension that just choked the kitchen. When Alina tries to explain, Sloane instantly holds up her hand. She points at her dough, declaring they will only unpack this romance later, and only when she has a strong drink. Alina lets out a small, broken laugh. It is fascinating how a little splash of humor steps in to save us, acting as our strongest emotional shield whenever reality becomes far too heavy to carry alone. The scene shifts to the isolated music room, a space anchored by a massive piano and dominated by a thick rug designed to swallow footsteps whole. Alina, suffocating under the morning tension, seeks refuge here. She borrows a dust cloth just to buy herself a moment of absolute silence. As she stands with her back to the entrance, polishing the wood, she tries to clear her frantic mind. But the heavy door swings open, completely devoid of sound, no warning, just the sudden, violent intrusion of a noxious perfume. The sharp sting of bitter lemon mixed with heavy amber floods the room, and her stomach drops as she recognizes the scent. It is a harsh reminder of a very simple truth. No matter how deep we hide ourselves in quiet corners, the shadows we try to outrun will always find a way to bleed under the door. Let us take a closer look at this moment, because the tension is thick enough to cut. Zoya enters the room, trapping Alina near the piano with a calculated, freezing question about whether she actually plays the music or merely scrubs the floors. Alina does not miss a beat, quietly working her cloth and insisting she is only the hired help. But then Zoya flashes a cold smile. Her designer heels tap against the floorboards like a ticking clock, and she asks Alina how she slept. That is not small talk. It is a snare. Zoya noticed something out of place, a locked door, a stray glance, and her survival instincts are ringing loud. It reminds us of a simple truth. We can bury our secrets under layers of silence, but eventually the truth always claws its way back to the surface. Alina slowly stops scrubbing, turning to meet her gaze, and the real psychological battle begins. Zoya is draped across the grand piano, wearing a tailored suit and deep red lipstick, looking every bit the apex predator, without breaking eye contact. Alina says she slept perfectly. Zoya immediately strikes, asking if the boss enjoyed his rest too. Most people would fold here, but Alina holds steady. She folds her rag with absolute calm, looks this dangerous woman in the eyes, and firmly reminds Zoya she is merely a guest. If she wants details about the boss, ask him directly. Zoya visibly cracks, her composure snapping as she spits out a threat about Alina being a cheap plaything. Jealousy is a bitter poison. It rots the vessel that carries it long before it ever touches the target. Stick with me here, because this exact moment redefines their entire dynamic. Alina refuses to yield an inch of ground. She holds her chin high and lightly asks how much longer Zoya plans to stay, just so the kitchen knows how many plates to set. The sheer nerve leaves Zoya completely stunned, her mouth opening and closing without a sound. But here is the real twist. Damon, the syndicate boss, has been quietly leaning against the doorframe the whole time. His arms are folded tight, his dark eyes fixed entirely on Alina. He makes no sound, proving that true power never needs to shout to control the atmosphere. Zoya finally turns, gasps in horror, and freezes in place. It is a sharp reminder that genuine confidence sits in silence, while deep insecurity scrambles to make the loudest noise. Zoya scrambles to rebuild her smirk, but her mouth is visibly shaking. Defeated, she storms out, brushing past Damon. He does not even blink at her exit, keeping his heavy gaze anchored on Alina. The moment they are alone, Damon pushes the heavy doors shut. He crosses the room in 3 long strides, lifting a scarred hand to gently push a fallen strand of hair behind her ear. He quietly tells her she did not have to face that fight by herself. But Alina holds her ground. She replies that if she cannot defend her own dignity now, she will spend her life hiding behind his shadow. That is a hard but necessary truth. You must step up to fight your own battles, because borrowing someone else's strength only leaves you helpless when the real danger finally arrives. Damon studies her face in a heavy, loaded silence. Slowly, his rough fingers trail down her arm until they find her hand, lacing their fingers tightly together. He bows his head, pressing a soft, deliberate kiss to her knuckles. It is a quiet gesture, but it shatters all of Alina's defenses. In that heartbeat, the realization hits her with crushing weight. She has fallen in love with the head of the crime family. A heavy lock finally breaks open inside her soul. True love rarely announces itself with fireworks. It usually slips in quietly, rewriting your whole world before you even notice. The rest of her afternoon passes in a quiet daze, but the winter dark falls quickly. Later that evening, while carrying fresh linens down a narrow service corridor, she glances out the glass window. Beyond the glass, the towering iron gate and its security booth are normally blazing with floodlights. Tonight, the checkpoint is swallowed by dead darkness. Alina goes rigid, her knuckles turning white against the curtain. The armed guard is nowhere to be seen. On the frozen sidewalk, 3 silhouettes stand perfectly still, blending into the night like phantoms. A passing beam of streetlight catches the cold steel of a suppressed rifle. Pure adrenaline dumps into system. We all eventually face a brutal second where our safe illusions shatter, forcing raw survival instincts to take the wheel. Instead of running blindly toward the main hall where she would be easily gunned down, she drops the linens and sprints for the hidden servant staircase, taking the steep steps 2 at a time. Her chest burns as she claws her way up the narrow passage. Bursting into the bright upper corridor, she hammers her fists against Damon's heavy office doors. He barks for her to enter, and she shoves the wood aside. Damon and his lead enforcer, Kirill, are leaning over a sprawl of blueprints. Alina struggles for air, gasping out that the back gate is completely dark and masked shooters are advancing. You and I need to appreciate the sudden shift here. In a fraction of a second, the gentleman who kissed her hand vanishes entirely, replaced by the cold-blooded architect of a crime empire. Damon's tone drops to absolute zero as he orders Kirill to ready the guns. It is a brutal reality. When the wolf is at the door, you must freeze your heart and let cold logic keep you alive. Damon processes the threat with mechanical speed. He aborts the garage escape. Knowing the front drive is already a death trap, Kirill barks frantic Russian orders into his radio. Damon commands Alina to lock herself in the cellar, but she refuses. She points out a forgotten dirt path, cutting through the garden toward the eastern boundary. The guards ignore it because it is just a muddy servant's trail, meaning the strike team will leave it unguarded. Damon searches her eyes, balancing the terror of losing her against the pure logic of her escape plan. Kirill gives a grim nod of agreement. Damon racks the slide of his pistol and orders her to show them the way. Keep this in mind. Sometimes the most overlooked and humble roads are the very ones that lead to our salvation. The mansion plunges into total war. They rush down the steps into the kitchen, finding the old cook paralyzed with fear. Kirill shoves her toward the reinforced pantry, ordering her to bolt the heavy door and stay quiet. She scrambles inside without a word. Alina guides them through a dark corridor, just as a heavy explosion of gunfire erupts from the grand foyer. The thick walls muffle the sound, but the violent rhythm of automatic rifles is undeniable. The main defenses have completely collapsed. Damon grips his weapon, quietly urging them to move faster. They push through the rear exit into the biting winter air, spotting 2 loyal soldiers holding the perimeter. When your world descends into absolute chaos, forcing yourself to keep moving forward is your only real chance at survival. Kirill flashes a tactical signal to the guards as they sprint across the frozen grass. But fate loves to change the rules. Without warning, a second team of masked assassins bursts from the greenhouse. One shooter opens fire in a wild panic. Damon instantly throws his full weight against Alina, slamming her into the brick wall to shield her. A stray round shatters the stone beside her ear, sending jagged shards ripping into her arm. Warm blood soaks her sleeve. Damon and Kirill return fire with terrifying precision, dropping the ambushers into the frosted mud. A heavy, ringing silence falls over the garden. It is a bitter lesson. Sometimes accepting a painful wound is the only way to avoid a fatal strike. Behind them, the battle inside the grand estate violently rages on. The roar of weapons suddenly cuts out. The very second the danger pauses, Damon drops his stoic mask. He spins Alina around, grabbing her shoulders with desperate hands. His eyes frantically search her coat, terrified of finding a fatal gunshot. His voice is ragged when he sees the blood on her sleeve. Alina softly reassures him. It is just a scrape from the brick, but he aggressively searches for other injuries anyway. The color drains from his face as the terror of almost losing her finally sets in. We must cherish the people we love while they stand in front of us, because tomorrow is never promised. The fragile moment shatters as Kirill relays grim news over the radio. The rival leader, Morozov, managed to flee the compound, leaving behind nothing but dead bodies and burning rubber. Morozov slipping away is a failure, but right now Damon does not care about Mafia politics. He cups Alina's dirt-stained face in his palms, handling her like spun glass. Blood is seeping through his own shirt from a grazed shoulder, but he ignores the pain entirely. He rests his heavy forehead against hers, closing his eyes. Alina whispers that she is alive, anchoring him to the only fact that matters. He offers no words, only the steady rhythm of his breathing. You and I need to understand that walking out of the storm is only half the battle. How we rebuild in the aftermath is what truly defines us. The clock jumps to 3 a.m. Inside the main house, the crystal chandelier illuminates a complete war zone, shining down over expensive rugs now ruined by dark stains. Walk through the doors with me and survey the aftermath. A priceless vase lies shattered across the marble stairs, surrounded by brass casings. In the shadows, Kirill murmurs, rapid Russian, tallying the casualties with the cold detachment of an accountant. Then, Grigory, the elderly advisor, slowly descends the stairs. He wears a simple silk robe, his silver hair perfectly styled, completely unarmed. When your reputation does the talking, you never need to brandish a weapon. Often, the man who refuses to panic is the most dangerous one in the room. His quiet composure stops the wounded soldiers from breaking down. At the center of it all sits Damon. His shirt is ruined with blood, and he is barking furious threats into a landline, preparing to bring the whole city to its knees. Today, we unpack this story in the immediate aftermath. Alina trembles on the staircase, her body rejecting the adrenaline as she presses a towel to her torn elbow. Beside her, Sloane proves what genuine loyalty looks like. No frantic questions, just a quiet presence shielding Alina's view as cleaners drag sheets over the carnage. We often navigate life with casual friends, but extreme trauma strips that away. In our darkest moments, discovering who stands by you is a profound lesson. The silence shatters as Damon slams the telephone down. The boss marches through the wreckage, skipping all pleasantries. He extends a scarred hand. Alina understands instantly. She reaches out, and right there, among his savage hitters, he pulls her into a desperate, grounding embrace. Here, the armor completely falls off the Mafia boss. He holds her as if she is the only gravity keeping him tethered to the earth. His ragged breathing threatens to crack her ribs. This isn't romantic yet. It is pure, desperate survival. Extreme trauma acts as a mirror. It violently strips away the fake masks we wear, revealing exactly who we truly care about. Over his shoulder, Kirill shoots a knowing look to Grigori, who suddenly acts fascinated by the doorframe. The silence in that room is absolute. You have the most ruthless syndicate boss on the planet, clinging to a housemaid inside a literal slaughterhouse at 3 in the morning. Every hitman standing in that bloody foyer instantly knows the undeniable truth. The king just found his new queen. We have all felt that harsh adrenaline crash. The morning sun rises, and the world suddenly feels far too bright and entirely out of place. Down in the kitchen, Alina and Sloane are running on absolute zero sleep. Kirill just finished stitching up her arm right on the kitchen table. It is a fascinating bit of poetic irony, because 2 years ago, she was the one stitching up his injured face. Life brings things full circle, reminding us that the kindness or damage we put out into the world always finds its way back to us. Sloane pours black coffee, while Alina awkwardly pretends she isn't swallowed up in Damon's massive blue shirt. Then, at 8 o'clock sharp, the reality of their world returns. Zoya struts down the stairs, clutching a designer bag and hiding behind heavy dark shades. Picture the cinematic framing here. Damon stands in his wrecked mansion, looking like a modern Grim Reaper in a tailored suit, completely ignoring his bullet wound. From the house, Alina and Sloane serve as the silent audience to this reckoning. His voice is terrifyingly calm as he tells Zoya her ride is waiting, offering a one-way ticket to Moscow. Zoya immediately resorts to tears and begging. But Damon's wall is impenetrable. The psychological crux is revealed. He already knows she was the informant who leaked his security codes. It perfectly illustrates how betrayal from within your own trusted circle is always the deadliest poison. He hands her a brutal ultimatum. Take the flight, fade into obscurity, and forget the Volkov Syndicate ever existed. With one quiet sentence, her reign is over. Or, he whispers with chilling precision, she can stay and find out exactly how his enforcers handle rats. He puts her on a strict 30-second timer. This quiet power reminds us that knowing when to swallow your pride and walk away is often the only way to survive a lost battle. Zoya recognizes her defeat. She grabs her bag and rushes out without a backward glance. Damon doesn't even watch her leave. Instead, his intense gaze cuts through the room's wreckage and instantly anchors onto Alina. Breaking the heavy tension, Sloane lets out a low whistle, turning back to the stove to mutter that Alina better lock that terrifying man down immediately. It is a much-needed moment of levity. Soon after, Damon retreats behind the oak doors of his dark study, isolating to himself to process the violent chaos. 10 minutes later, the inevitable summons arrives. As Alina ascends the staircase, we witness a profound shift. She realizes her days of hiding safely in the shadows are over. Damon is behind his desk, jacket discarded and shirt unbuttoned to expose white bandages. He motions for her to sit, tightly crossing his arms over his wounded chest as if physically trying to hold his own heart together. The stoic syndicate boss is unraveling. He plainly confesses that he almost lost his mind thinking she died in the crossfire. Then, the emotional floodgates burst. Alina pours out the buried trauma of losing her family. She reveals a heartbreaking core belief. Loving someone means carrying the crushing burden of keeping them alive. It perfectly illustrates how the terror of future loss can completely paralyze us. Here, their psychological profiles perfectly mirror each other. Damon suffered from that exact same protective obsession. He admits his plan was to ship her out that afternoon, buying a ticket to safety so the syndicate's violence could never touch her. When she tries to argue, he gently asks for silence. The beautiful irony is that by saving him during the ambush, she entirely dismantled his strategy. In this fragile moment, a ruthless Don unlearns decades of savage conditioning. He finally understands. True love isn't about building a protective cage. It requires trusting your partner enough to let them choose their own battles. It is a humbling life lesson for a man addicted to total control. He holds her gaze steadily across the desk and finally surrenders to the unvarnished truth. He tells her he loves her. Stick with me. We need to analyze the magnitude of this breakthrough. A syndicate kingpin dropping a genuine confession of love. This man kept his humanity locked in a steel vault his entire life. He only spoke those words because holding them back was physically suffocating him. Alina sits there, stunned by the emotional shockwaves. But then she meets his vulnerability with her own. She admits she spent years playing the background character, paralyzed by the terror of making the wrong choice. It is a powerful realization. Surviving out of pure fear isn't truly living. It is merely a slow fade into nothingness. Stepping up during the shootout was her first real assertion of agency. Instead of retreating to safety, she chose the dangerous chaos of staying by his side over the emptiness of walking away. The atmosphere in the study shifts instantly. Damon closes his eyes, letting her quiet defiance shatter the iron armor he has worn since childhood. It proves that true vulnerability is often our sharpest weapon, and she has completely disarmed him. She meets his gaze and finally says she loves him too. The words drop like heavy anchors in the silent room. He wastes no time. Crossing the space, he cups her face with scarred hands as if she were crafted from fragile glass. This isn't the frantic, blood-soaked clash of survival from the night before. This is the calm, deliberate seal of a powerful man locking in a lifetime vow. When they eventually pull back, he keeps his forehead resting gently against hers. Breaking the gravity of the moment, he asks in a rapt voice if she still intends to scrub his floors. Alina's response is beautifully grounded. She admits she doesn't know how to be anyone else. Damon promises she never has to work another day in her life. But Alina just smiles, a spark of rebellion in her eyes. This serves as a brilliant reminder. Stepping into your power doesn't mean erasing your core identity. She genuinely loves the kitchen's chaotic rhythm and her grounded routines. Her only demand? She is officially done sleeping in the cramped of servant quarters. Damon offers a rare, unshadowed smile, a vulnerability reserved exclusively for her. and confirms the upgrade. The shift in the estate's dynamic is fascinating. She still brews coffee that afternoon, but now hardened enforcers respectfully step out of her path. When night finally falls over the compound, she steps out onto the master balcony. You and I have probably both experienced this. Profound growth usually happens quietly in the background. By afternoon, Kirill, the syndicate's lethal enforcer, was operating as her personal mover. Her worn bags, dog-eared books, and the photograph were carried straight into the massive closet. It is a staggering elevation in status. Now, she simply stands there, swallowed up in another of Damon's heavy navy shirts, breathing in the scent of sharp cologne and rain. Barefoot on the balcony, she leans over the railing with quiet authority. Peering down from the pinnacle of this criminal empire, she stares past the fortified walls and the dense tree line. She is calmly observing the stark physical barrier between her violent new reality and the ordinary world she left entirely in the dust. Let me paint the final image for you. Picture the freezing November winds whipping off Lake Forest, carrying that raw winter bite. Alina stands alone on the balcony. Without a sound, the glass door slides open. Damon steps out into the cold, barefoot, carrying a heavy wool blanket. He drapes it carefully over her shoulders, pulling her flush against his chest. It is an image of unshakable security. For a former street kid raised in brutal walk-up apartments, a girl forced to nurse her sick mother at 17, this level of unconditional safety feels entirely alien. She has spent her whole life keeping one foot out the door. But here is the ultimate lesson. We often spend our lives running on absolute empty, exhausting ourselves, praying we can finally find one safe place to simply stand still. For 23 years, Alina's existence has been an endless exercise in survival. She has known temporary shelters, but never a true sanctuary. Yet, standing on that balcony, tethered to the most feared man in the city, she allows herself to believe the illusion. He presses a soft kiss to her hair, an action that feels like a permanent promise. She grips his hand, unaware of the destruction waiting for her. At dawn, the morning sun is preparing to detonate her reality. It is a cruel paradox of the human experience. We often feel the most secure just moments before the ground collapses beneath our feet. This devastating climax closes the first chapter, but the narrative does not stop here. You and I can continue this exploration into the second book today and uncover what happens when the illusion shatters. Let us shift our focus to the Don, a man whose reputation is built on absolute ruthlessness. He has ordered executions over mere whispers of disrespect, yet decades of detachment cannot prepare him for the envelope on his desk. Inside lies a photograph of her mother, a letter from her brother, and a financial ledger. Together, they form a damning confession. The innocent maid wearing his shirts is actually a calculated spy sent to dismantle his empire. For 7 agonizing minutes, the most feared man in Chicago sits perfectly still, paralyzed by the revelation. It brings us to a painful realization. A knife in the back from an enemy is a hazard of the trade, but betrayal from someone who holds your heart will tear the very fabric of your soul. His foundation is cracking, and the fallout will be catastrophic. As we discussed, that devastating cliffhanger is merely a prologue to the emotional destruction waiting in the second part of this story. The consequences of their shattered trust are profound. If you want to experience the unfiltered reality of this broken romance, follow the first link pinned in the comments. I will be waiting there to guide you through the wreckage. It is a universal certainty that the truth will always force its way to the surface. but it is our reaction to that painful exposure that ultimately defines our character. Check the pinned comment to access the complete second volume. There are 0 advertisements and no sudden interruptions to ruin your focus. We can easily continue dissecting this tragic dynamic together right now, exploring the darkest corners of their broken bond.